All right, it is 8:59 and we are very excited to get to the field and see what is happening. I'm Sarah Falkowski. I'm the education coordinator at Rookery Bay National Estuary Research Reserve in Naples, Florida. And we want to welcome you to our celebration of National Estuaries Week. We are celebrating from last Saturday until this upcoming Saturday, all around the country. And in our audience today, we have students all the way through adults. We call it K to Gray, and we can see you from all around the globe. So we're really glad that you're joining us. This event will be recorded and archived on our website if you'd like to share or review it again later. And I want to take an opportunity to introduce my colleagues that are with us today. We have Morgan Zeleny.
Hey everyone, my name is Morgan. I am the most recent inaugural Norris Gaynor Education Fellow, and I'm really happy to be here today helping out the education team and our stewardship team in our scrub walk. So thanks for tuning in.
And my name is Sarah Norris, and I am part of the stewardship team. I help with the sea turtle monitoring, exotics, and everything else in between.
That's great. And you guys are in for a real show today because we have some other people that are in the field that will be joining us. But in the meantime, I want to tell you a little bit about the housekeeping of the webinar and also who we are so you know what you're watching. So for housekeeping, you'll notice that you are in webinar format. That means that we can't see you and we can't hear you. And if you want to communicate with us, which we hope you will, you can use the chat box, which is located at the bottom of your screen. And you will be able to communicate with all of us on the panel. You can tell us if you can't hear or see, things like that. Now, if you have a question for anyone in the panel, we ask that you use what's called the Q&A feature, and that is just to the left of that chat box at the bottom. When you type your question in there, it will go to the panelists and we'll be able to answer it there or answer it live. And then you will be able to see all of the answered questions in that box. So keep an eye on that as you're playing along. So now I'm going to tell you a little bit about who we are. So I've got this cool slide, if I can advance it here. We are part of a national network of other National Estuary Research Reserves all around the country. So we are located down here at number 18 in Southwest Florida, along the Gulf of Mexico. We are on the western edge of the Everglades. And every one of these reserves is celebrating National Estuaries Week this week. It's really special. A little bit about what Rookery Bay looks like. We manage 110,000 acres. So up here at the top of the map would be where Naples is located. And we manage everything within this yellow boundary here. We go around Marco Island, this way around Cape Romano. We encompass the 10,000 islands and we border Everglades National Park right here on this stair-step boundary. And our field team that I'm about to turn it over to is located right in this section here today. So really exciting. We're going to get to have a look at their camera and hear and see what they're experiencing live from the field. So let me stop sharing my screen and I'm going to turn it over to the field cam.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dita. I am part of the education team and I'm here in the scrub. And you might be wondering, earlier this week, we were at a beach, we were on a barrier island, and now we're in some uplands because whatever happens up here on the land affects what's downstream in the water. So the reserve does protect some uplands as well. And I do have a team here with me today. So behind me, I have...
Hi guys, my name's Janine. I'm also with the education team at the reserve, and I'm doing more behind the scenes in the field today, keeping everybody together.
And then the star of our show, if I switch my camera around, we have...
Hi everyone, my name is Jared Franklin. I'm on the stewardship department. And as Sarah Norris said, we're responsible for managing the 110,000 acres from invasive species to sea turtles to prescribed fire to cultural resources. There's quite a lot going on here. So Today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about some of the management activities we do up in the scrub. So I figured we'd start off with invasive plants. So I'm going to be talking a bit about invasive plants. Sometimes people will also use the word exotic. So exotic just means non-native. Invasive is a type of exotic species that invades, it takes over. So basically think of a weed in your garden, except on a much bigger level. These plants take over our natural areas. They create worse habitat for a lot of our wildlife species. So our job is to remove them. Just like you'd weed a garden, we kind of weed out these plants from our natural areas. So this is one of these species. This is Brazilian pepper. And I think Sarah Norris is going to have a better picture, a bigger picture. This is just a little small sprig. And this is public enemy number one. It's a bush from Brazil and adjacent areas of South America. It's very aggressive. It takes over a lot of our natural areas very quickly. So it's a constant struggle to keep this species out of our natural areas. Sometimes it's called Florida holly because it has these bright red berries that you might see on the picture that Sarah's pulling up. And they just crowd out and smother our native plant species.
And I believe, Jared, there's another invasive plant in this area that you wanted to point out.
Yeah. So this might be a little bit harder to see. Here, I'll see if I can flip it. This is, actually, it might be easier to see against my shirt. This is rose natal grass. It's a very fast-growing grass. It seeds out very quickly, and it has these white to reddish seed heads. This grass is from South Africa, and it is one of the species that really invades the scrub and other dry sites. So luckily, it's not too bad in the interior of the Shell Island Road scrub, but along the edges of Shell Island Road, this plant is very, very aggressive. All right. So I think we'll take a quick walk into the scrub, see what we can see, and go from there.
Yeah, while we do that, Sarah Norris, if you want to talk a little bit about some of the wildlife cameras you use to catch some of the more elusive animals found in the scrub.
Alrighty, so we've got many different wildlife that inhabit Rookery Bay Reserve. So we're going to highlight a few of those that we've seen on wildlife cameras that Jared has had out in the scrub habitat over the past few years. So one of them being this really maybe a little bit unusual, maybe not seen a whole lot, the spotted skunk. So there's not a whole lot known about this population in South Florida, but we're happy to see them here on our wildlife cameras. These cameras are a really great tool because they're able to see more than we can and capture images of wildlife that we otherwise may not know are using our habitats here in Rookery Bay Reserve. So we know that the spotted skunk likes shrubby habitat with a lot of coverage, which is exactly the type of things we're going to see today as the field staff is walking around there in the upland habitats of the reserve. The next species that we have is also a native species. It's the Florida black bear. So it is the only bear species in Florida. And it is the second largest terrestrial mammal behind the bison. So that's another fun fact to keep in your back pocket. They're pretty shy and reclusive unless you're, around a mother and her cubs. She may get a little bit more territorial then. And so again, they like traversing the scrub habitat and the upland habitats as well. And I believe we have some evidence of black bear. If you can look over to the field camera, they were able to see evidence of a black bear recently by this paw print.
If you folks are having trouble seeing the print, I encourage you to use this gray bar that's next to the PowerPoint and in between the field cam. You can toggle that back and forth, making the one screen bigger than the other or half and half. So definitely check that out. Gives you a really good view of both.
Okay. So another native species that we have here in the reserve is the Florida panther. So they are a really neat comeback story here in South Florida. So back in the day, the population had really dwindled down to about 20 or 30 individuals. So land managers and people with the state of Florida decided they were going to restore the population. So they actually brought in cougars from Texas to help bring the Florida panther numbers back up and create genetic diversity. Since then, numbers have climbed upwards of anywhere from 180 to 200 individuals, they believe. But their biggest threat is needing enough habitat. So the males do like a lot of square mileage for their territory, so approximately 200 square miles or so. And so that poses a problem with the amount of habitat available in our area of Florida. And as younger males are trying to figure out where their territory will be as they grow and develop into adults. We've seen them here in the scrub. There was also one that was tracked out to Key Wading Island. So, might not think of cats liking the water, but they do have the ability to swim and travel large distances over time. So they feed on a variety of things such as small mammals or on things like invasive feral hogs. So this is an invasive animal species that we have here in the reserve. They believe that they were first introduced back in the 1500s when Hernando de Soto came to Florida. So these are present in all counties of Florida and even outside of Florida. And they pose a major threat to our landscape and natural habitats here in the reserve and neighboring preserve lands. So they use their large snout to root up the ground in search of food, such as like plants, insects, fruits, anything that they can find that they seem to enjoy. And when you see this damage, it almost looks like a plow has gone and plowed up the open areas or grasses or fields and things like that. So you may have seen some of this damage and not really known why is all this grass torn up? Why is this area next to the trail I'm walking on all torn up, and what caused that? And it could have been the feral hog here. So that damage to the soil and the landscape is unfortunately a really good way for some of those invasive plant species to take hold. So it's disturbing the natural plant community and allowing things like maybe those grasses that Jared mentioned earlier, or Brazilian pepper, or one of our other invasive plant species to take hold before the native plants can come back in and take hold naturally. Let's see here. So another species that we have here is the gopher tortoise. So if you'd ever drive down Shell Island Road or you're walking along a trail in an upland habitat, you may have seen these guys before, or maybe evidence of a burrow. So they are considered a keystone species. So a keystone species is a species that is important for the whole landscape and sort of the big picture ecosystem. So if you think about building a bridge, that last piece right at the top, the wedge piece, sort of holds the bridge together. And if you were to remove that, then the whole bridge would collapse. And that's sort of how these particular species get lumped into that umbrella category of keystone species. So for the gopher tortoise specifically, they like to dig these elaborate burrow systems underground in these upland habitats, such as the scrub. And those burrows provide a safe home for a number of species. They estimate over 300 animals. So whether that's, a safe haven during a prescribed burn, during cold weather, for breeding and so forth, these animals provide an important ecosystem function for a number of animals in the upland habitats. But unfortunately, they also provide a space for non-native wildlife. So one of those being the invasive Burmese python. So I'm going to share a photo or a series of photos while Jared gives you all a little bit more information about that.
20 seconds.
All right, so the Burmese python is one of those invasive animals that's really having a big impact on the greater Everglades ecosystem. They're an apex predator, which means they eat pretty much everything and nothing really eats them. So the more pythons we have, the more decreases we've been seeing in our native species like rabbits, possums, raccoons, because the pythons are eating them all. Now, pythons can grow very large, to about they have about the girth of a telephone pole, and they can get up to 20 feet long. But for an animal as big as they are, they're surprisingly hard to find. So a little bit earlier, I came out here with a python skin, and I hid it here in the scrub to illustrate how hard it is to find them. So I don't know, Dita, if you want to take a look around, see if you can find it.
Okay. I definitely have not had to track a python before, Jared.
All right, well, you're getting warmer. Sit this way.
Maybe you guys see something. I definitely. Holy cow!
Yeah. Yeah.
This
so,
is some amazing camouflage.
Yeah. So I don't know if you can see it on as well on your video, but this is the skin. I believe it's about a 12-foot female python from the Shell Island Road scrub area. And this is what they look like out in the field. They're hiding in amongst the palmettos, amongst the scrub oaks. They're ambush predators, so they like to kind of hide in these in this dense vegetation and ambush their prey as their prey walks by. So these pythons have a nice camouflage pattern. It's brown. It blends in with the vegetation. So a big challenge in our job is just finding the pythons. Now, we've been partnering with the Conservancy of Southwest Florida. They have been implanting telemetry units in some of the pythons, then letting those pythons go back out into the scrub. And during the breeding season, we can track those pythons with a little radio antenna, and those pythons will lead us to other pythons. And we've had some pretty good success with that technique. It turns out pythons are better at finding other pythons than we are. So, well.
And as we walk, Jared, I noticed we're in the scrub and there are a lot of different plants, but I did notice some differences in the plants as we walked. What's going on?
Yeah, so in South Florida, we kind of measure our elevation in inches, not feet. because every inch above the water table matters. So slight changes in elevation produce big changes in habitat. So we're kind of in a scrub area now. So scrub is dominated by 3 species of scrub oaks, small, low-growing oaks. Actually, you can see some of the, actually, I think we have all 3 of them here. So Chapman's oak and myrtle oak. Myrtle oak has a little bit rounder leaves. Chapman's oak kind of has teeth. And then over here, on the other side of our python skin, we have the sand live oak. So as you can see, all 3 of these species are generally pretty low growing. We also have other species like palmetto, hog plum, and love vine. So these species kind of define scrub habitat, and all of these plant species actually depend on fire to grow, to germinate their seeds. And I think we'll be talking about fire a little bit later. But I noticed over on the other side of the trail, we have a nice change of habitat. So we can start making our way over there and talk about the different habitats we see. All right, so we're kind of on the back side of the scrub. It's a little hard to see, but there is a very slight decrease in elevation behind us. So the scrub habitat, like I said, is dominated by low-growing oaks. And then further behind me, we have what are called Mesic flatwoods. Mesic just means not too wet, not too dry. And there's a different set of species there. Typically, we have a lot more slash pine canopy, and the understory is dominated by saw palmetto and staggerbush, which actually we have right here. Staggerbush is in the same family as mountain laurel, blueberry. Actually, I think we do have some blueberry out here as well. That's another Mesic flatwood species. And a little bit further on, I don't know if we'll have the time to get out there today, but a little bit further on, it gets a little bit wetter, and the saw palmetto and the staggerbush kind of drop out of the mix, and we get a lot more grass, a lot more swamp fern. And those plants like to get a little bit wetter. And then finally, way in the distance, it gets even wetter still. And we have a freshwater marsh with some cattail, some cordgrass, a lot of grasses in that marsh. And so it's only a change of maybe a foot or two, but in South Florida, such a little change can make a really big difference in our plants. And like I said before, a lot of these plants rely on fire. Actually, you can kind of see some old burn marks on this slash pine. Slash pine is really well adapted to fire. It has a thick bark that keeps the fire from burning the tree. This area we're in right now had a prescribed burn. I believe it was February of 2019, so about a year and a half ago. And walking through it now, it's hard to tell. It's hard to tell that this area was burned. We try to mimic the natural fire conditions here in South Florida by doing prescribed burns. And we do the prescribed burns under a very specific set of circumstances. to keep the fire contained and under control.
And with that, let's switch over to Sarah Norris, and she can show us some images of them conducting prescribed burns.
Absolutely. Here we go. All right. So we use, like Jared said, prescribed burning as a tool. So we like to think about prescribed burn in the terms of keeping our habitats nice and healthy. So if you think about when you're sick, you go to the doctor and they prescribe you medicine to make you feel better. That's essentially how we view fire on these different upland habitats. So fire happens naturally, even before land managers decided to use it as a tool. So these habitats typically need fire every 3 to 5 years to stay healthy. Depending on the specific type of habitats, that may change, but for most of ours here in the reserve, it's about 3 to 5. So we do this for one of many reasons. It clears out the underbrush, it returns nutrients to the soil to keep that plant life nice and healthy. And like Jared said, a lot of the native plant species here have adapted to fire. So I'm going to show you some series of images that we use for our fire monitoring program. So within our upland habitats, we have certain points where we take photos pre-burn, like this photo here. And then we take photos after the burn, so it looks like this. So you can see that the slash pines are nice and green on top. Like Jared said, they've got really thick bark that they've adapted to. And then the crown of the tree, basically where a lot of their branches start to be pushed out, is a bit higher up. So the goal of the pine tree is to get the crown of the tree as high as it can and grow, so that way it's not affected by the burn as well. And then you'll see 1 year later, it's nice and green and has grown almost back to that initial state of a pre-burn. So this opens up the habitat for wildlife to come through. You give it a few days or a week and you'll start to see little sprouts of different plants coming back and the deer munching on it. So all of our native wildlife, can sense that a burn is happening, whether it's prescribed burn or a wildfire here in Southwest Florida, and is able to get on the move and get out of there. And for those that are a bit smaller, they may retreat into those gopher tortoise burrows that we talked about earlier. This is also a great tool to target some of those exotic species or invasive species that Jared's always on the hunt for to treat. So some of those may not burn as well as our native species because they're not adapted to fire. So by having a more opened area, like right after a burn here, going in and doing removal makes it a little bit easier to traverse the landscape and identify those invasive species. All right. I'm going to pass it back to Jared now.
All right, so we walked maybe another couple hundred feet, and we are deeper into those mesic flatwoods I was talking about earlier. You can see that the vegetation is a little bit different. We don't have any more scrub oaks here. It's a little bit wetter. I'm actually standing in a couple inches of water right here. And further behind me, we're right up on the edge of that marsh area. Now, speaking of water makes a very big difference on the types of management activities we can do here in South Florida. So we pretty much have two seasons. Our rainy season starts around the end of May or so and continues through the end of October. And then we have our dry season during the winter. And for activities like prescribed fire, we need to have just the right moisture level. If it's too wet, we won't be able to light the prescribed fire. If it's too dry, then we don't want the fire to burn out of control. So we try to conduct our prescribed burns in kind of that happy medium. So yeah, this is our music flatwoods. We have some gallberry, we have some saw palmetto, we have some more staggerbush. And I think with that, that's...
I do have a quick question
yeah.
for you. So I know Sarah mentioned how the slash pine is adapted to fires. Do any of these other plants have any interesting adaptations to burns, or?
Yeah, so a lot of these plant species have very vigorous root systems. So you can kind of see over here. We have these dead parts of the bush up top. Now these stems died when we lit the prescribed fire here a year and a half ago. But you can see there's some new growth. The plants are growing back. And that's because they keep a lot of their energy in the root systems. The root systems are underground. They don't get burned. So these plants are able to rebound pretty quickly after a fire. Other plants have different strategies. So saw palmetto, cabbage palm, they protect their growing buds. They have these long palm fronds. So the palm fronds burn, but the stem where the plant grows from doesn't burn. So our palmettos generally do pretty well after a fire. They're actually the first plant species to kind of rebound after a fire. And a lot of our plant species depend on fire for their seeds to germinate. So down here in South Florida, fire is just part of the ecosystem, and we try to mimic that fire as well as we can.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jared, for letting us come out with you today. And this is just a little glimpse of some of what our resource management and stewardship team does. They have 110,000 acres to manage. So we just wanted to give you a little bit of a glimpse of some of the uplands area that we work with and talk about some of the management strategies and issues that they're handling. And with that, we can go over to questions.
All right, guys, thank you so much. It was super informative. We learned a lot, saw a lot. That python skin you guys really got us with, so thank you for all of that. All right, so we have a question. We want to know, and Jared, you might have touched on this briefly, but we want to know, what is a telemetry unit and what would it be used for if you were doing some sort of resource management, maybe with the pythons?
Yeah, so a telemetry unit is basically a little radio antenna, and they're small enough that we can implant those radio antennas either on or inside an animal, and those radio antennas give off a little signal. So the radio telemetry units can help us track an animal. If the telemetry unit is on the animal and we go out with the radio antenna, we can figure out where the signal is coming from, and we can track the animal using the radio antenna, as opposed to just wandering around looking for the animals. It makes our job quite a bit easier.
Great, thank you. And maybe you and Sarah can both tag team this question, but we want to know, how does the resource management team decide where to put those trail cameras to keep track of, maybe the bears or the small mammals? How do you guys decide that?
So we, kind of try to get in the mind of some of those animals that we have here in the reserve, and almost, where would you like to walk? Would you like to rather walk in a nice open trail, or would you want to travel through some of that dense brush that, maybe Jared's walking through right now? So we try to think about high traffic areas, and whether that's along existing trails or fire breaks is sort of how we determine where we're going to place them. And time of year may also come into play as well, especially during the rainy season. trails that may be pretty flooded out from our afternoon thunderstorms. You know, maybe not as many animals are passing through those areas.
Thank you. So we also want to know, our viewers are interested. So you mentioned invasive species, exotic species, how those things are different. We want to know, how do you determine if a species is truly invasive? What are the evidence pieces that you guys use to determine that?
Yeah, so an invasive species is just a species that takes over an area. A lot of times it's kind of easy to tell because you come across an area and there's only one species of plant there. It's not like we see here where we have a couple different plant species. It's just one species of plant. And the same goes for animals too. With species like pythons or iguanas or other invasive animals, we can kind of tell that they're invasive because they spread very rapidly. There's a lot of them, and they're not native to the area. Just knowing that something isn't native helps us kind of figure out, oh, this thing shouldn't be here. It's acting invasive in this context.
Great. And we did have some questions as to your attire, Jared. You know, Southwest Florida in the summer, it is hot, hot, hot. Today, I feel like you guys got a break, but we were also wondering, what is that you have in your hand? Is it a potential umbrella for the storms, or is it more of a resource tool that you use in the field? Let us know.
Yeah, so this is a machete. It is, I kind of go everywhere with it. It's a very important tool for our job. So in areas that haven't been burned recently, the vegetation can get very dense and it's very difficult to walk through. So I use this a lot to just make paths to get to where I need to go. I also use it for invasive species management. So with bigger invasive plants like pepper or earleaf acacia, we girdle the trees. So I just use the machete to chop all the way around the base of the tree. And I also use this sometimes for catching pythons. So we catch our pythons alive. Like I mentioned earlier, we give the pythons to the Conservancy of Southwest Florida, and they will stick a transmitter on the python. And the best way to catch a python is to pin down its head. So instead of carrying a stick around to pin down the head, I just use the machete in its sheath. And it's kind of hard to illustrate here, but I use the flat part of the machete just to pin down the python's head until I can get a good grip on the animal. So the machete is kind of your all-around resource management tool.
It seems to be. That's awesome. Thank you for that. We also want to know, so you and Sarah both talked about some prescribed burns and how you even do them out there in the scrub and in other areas of the reserve to keep all those vegetations in check. We would like to know, how long in the scrub area, for example, would a prescribed burn last? As in, when would you have to do it incrementally? What's the time frame on that?
So in terms of between times it needs to be burned is every 3 to 5 years. So if we determine there's an area that's up for a little bit of fire on the ground, then, you know, there's a lot of different factors that go into that. So one of them being the weather has to be just right. So, you know, we have to get permission from forestry to be able to even conduct a burn that day. So once things start to dry out, we'll begin prepping our fire lines. So essentially those are areas where our safety lines are, and that sort of break up these different units, we call them, within our burnable habitat of the reserve. So that way we're ready if the weather's good one day and we have enough resources, meaning people and equipment, to be able to conduct the burn safely. So sometimes we may conduct burns that are only a handful of acres, or up to a couple hundred acres. So it just depends on the need of that unit that year, the weather, and our ability to conduct it safely in terms of staff and equipment.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. And one of our last few questions I think we're going to ask today, our viewers want to know, there are a lot of snakes in Southwest Florida and, across the nation, but is there any way right off the bat to tell a venomous snake between a non-venomous snake?
Well, it's a little bit difficult right off the bat. Venomous snakes in Southwest Florida tend to have wider heads, bigger heads, but you can't really get a good look at the head unless you're really close to the snake. A big part of telling the difference is just to know what the venomous snakes in Southwest Florida are. So up here in the scrub, we have diamondback rattlesnakes. We also have pygmy rattlesnakes, which are smaller. And then we also have coral snakes and cottonmouths, which we don't get cottonmouths up here in the scrub. But those are kind of the four snakes we tried to keep fresh in our mind. We know how to identify those four snakes, and generally, if we come across a snake that isn't one of those four snakes, we know it's not venomous.
Great, thank you. So err on the side of caution, friends. If you see a snake and you're not sure, don't approach. And the last thing, we had a lot of questions today about where exactly are you guys? So I know we saw on our little map within the reserve where we're located, but maybe Sarah, you could show us a more zoomed in, maybe an aerial shot of exactly where they're walking today. It'll give you guys some good perspective.
Absolutely. So let me share my screen here. Okay, so didn't like that. All right. Here's a little visual of Shell Island Road. So at the bottom left of the photograph is the Briggs Boardwalk and Nature Center. So this boardwalk is open to the public. This Shell Island Road is also open dawn to dusk every day. And this is about a 3-mile paved road that extends from Collier Boulevard all the way over to Henderson Creek. So today our field staff is right about here. So they are just off Shell Island Road. So this photo gives you a good visual of those different habitats and sort of that bird's eye view of the different upland habitats that we have. So Jared was able to point out some of the subtle differences walking along, but this drone shot here really shows you those pine flatwoods, the lower scrubby areas, and even some of those more wet habitats like over here and our freshwater marshes. And then if you can peek all the way over here to this corner, this is extending out to some more submerged habitats as well.
Wonderful, thank you. We are going to conclude questions so we can wrap you guys up on time. I'm going to turn it back over to our education coordinator, Sarah. Thank you, Sarah Norris, for all those helpful photographs and giving us some really good tidbits about scrub habitat and who lives in it. So thank you guys for joining us. Sarah will conclude and give us a really good synopsis of what's to come.
All right, thank you guys so much for joining us today. It was really great to see all your familiar names in the audience, and we're so glad that you were here, but there's more. So here is a flyer of all of the events we have this week. I know the font is small, so I made this extra picture that doesn't want to pop up. There we go. Okay, so this is what we have left for the rest of the week. We hope you'll join us tomorrow morning when we're going out finding fish on a boat trawl. So you will meet our fisheries biologist and the rest of the education team while we're actually out in the estuary, pulling a net to see what kinds of creatures live below. So that's tomorrow at 9:45 a.m. Register online. Friday, we do not have a program in the morning because we're doing an afternoon program with the Emmy award-winning filmmaker who created our documentary called Mangrove Coast, and that's currently airing on PBS. So you can get a behind the scenes look at the film, how it was made, and meet some of the actors. So that's going to take place on Friday at 1 p.m. And then our culminating event that you all have an edge at because you're participating in these programs is our estuary trivia. So Friday night at 7 p.m., you are invited to join us to test how much of an estuary hero you are. So we will have all kinds of nature-oriented questions about all kinds of fun stuff in Southwest Florida and beyond. And we invite you to play along with us. It's an interactive forum where you'll have your own device and there are prizes. So I'm going to give us a final slide here. And I'm going to just give everyone an opportunity to say thank you for joining. And if your question wasn't answered today, we're so sorry because there are so many of you in the webinar. We have over 800 people attending. So lots of students out there. Thank you for your questions and your hand raises. It's really special in this remote time when we're not able to see you in person to still be able to connect. The end of this presentation, as soon as you click end, you will receive a survey on your screen. We really hope that you will consider clicking the link to fill out the questions because as you can see, we're doing this every day and we want to make sure that we're doing it better every day. So give us your feedback, good, bad, ugly, we want it because we want to be the best by the end of the week. So please let us know how we did today and we'll hope to see you next time. Until tomorrow.